Night settled over the desert like a slow breath, drawing a pale line across the dunes as if the land itself were preparing to sleep. The patrol moved with quiet familiarity, their boots pressing gentle prints into sand that shifted only after they passed. No one spoke, the silence had a weight they had come to accept, a softness that felt almost protective. Then, on the horizon, a thin vertical shimmer appeared, faint at first, like a candle held behind frosted glass. It did not dance. It did not flicker. It simply stood there, steady, bright, and strangely patient. One of the men lifted his scope, expecting to see heat rising from it, but the device reported nothing. The light had form without temperature, presence without heat, a contradiction that made the air around them feel subtly expectant. They watched it for several minutes, waiting for wind to break its shape, but the wind passed harmlessly by, bending the brush yet leaving the flame untouched. It was a calm impossibility, the kind that invited attention rather than fear, and each man felt the gentle pull of curiosity settling deeper into him. None of them stepped forward at first. The desert had a way of teaching patience, and the men sensed that rushing towards something that defied its own nature would be like interrupting a conversation they did not yet understand. The lieutenant finally raised his hand, signaling the team to remain still while he logged the sighting. His voice, though low, seemed to fade quicker than usual, as if the night absorbed sound before it could travel. The flame held its place, neither advancing nor shrinking, but maintaining a silent dialogue with the darkness around it. The men felt watched, though not in a hostile way, more like the way one feels when entering a quiet room where someone is already thinking. The shimmer brightened, catching the reflective strip on a nearby canteen. The reflection elongated across the sand, as though the light were examining them in return. When the lieutenant lowered his logbook, he realized his hand had stopped trembling without him noticing. The flame's steady presence had a calming effect, a strange assurance that nothing sudden would happen. It was as if the desert itself had paused to witness this encounter, holding its breath so the men could understand that what they saw was not a threat but an invitation to observe. In that stillness, they felt the beginning of a mystery settling quietly into the night. The desert stretched outward in quiet layers, each dune resting against the next like folded pages of an old book. Nothing moved except the thin ribbon of night wind, yet even that felt cautious, as if it were passing through a place that preferred stillness. Soldiers on patrol had walked this terrain for months, but tonight something subtle pressed against their awareness. It wasn't fear or danger, it was the sense of being observed by something that had no form, no eyes, no breath, only presence. When the strange flame reappeared on the ridge, they recognized it instantly. It held the same unwavering shape as before, steady and silent, though its reflection appeared oddly closer in the glass of their vehicle windows, as if the light measured distance differently than their eyes did. One of the men tapped the mirror lightly, thinking the glass had caught another angle, but the reflection didn't behave like regular light. It lingered at a distance that felt near, a peculiar closeness that suggested attention rather than proximity. Command dismissed earlier reports as optical mirages caused by temperature shifts, but mirages faded with movement and changed with angle. This flame did neither. It kept its position night after night, appearing exactly where the desert's curve met the darkness. The men noticed details they hadn't earlier, how their boot prints near the ridge remained unusually crisp, how the sand around them felt slightly firmer beneath their steps, and how the faint rustle of shrubs seemed to withdraw as they approached the light. Nothing felt threatening. Instead, it felt composed, like a landscape quietly aware of its visitors. One soldier mentioned that the air around them carried a mild expectation, as though the land waited to see what they would do next. They didn't move closer, experience told them that some things in the desert were better understood slowly. The flame glowed brighter for a moment, reflecting across the surface of a spare water canister. The elongated streak shimmered with a gentleness that made the men pause, realizing the phenomenon wasn't random. It was deliberate, patient, and entirely unbothered by their presence. In that moment, each soldier sensed that the desert was not empty after all, it was watching, remembering, and quietly inviting them to listen. The team moved toward the strange flame with the steady caution learned from years in the desert. Nothing about the night felt unusual except the silence, which deepened with every step they took. The sand beneath their boots seemed to soften the sound, absorbing each footfall as if encouraging quiet. Ahead of them, the flame held its position, bright but motionless, refusing to sway even when a brief wind brushed across the ridge. The men paused at a distance, expecting heat to radiate toward them, but the air remained cool, almost indifferent. One soldier lifted a thermal scope, scanning the glow for any sign of temperature. The screen remained blank, no warmth, no fluctuation, nothing that suggested combustion. It was like staring at an image rather than a living flame, yet the light clearly existed, illuminating the sand around it in a crisp halo. When they resumed walking, the desert grew quieter still. No insects hummed, no distant engine droned, and even their breathing felt muted, as if the atmosphere had thickened with anticipation. The closer they came, the more the strangeness settled around them. The flame bent slightly, leaning toward the group without any breeze to encourage it. It was a subtle, almost polite motion, like a head turning to acknowledge a visitor. The men felt their nerves tighten, not from fear but from the unsettling realization that the phenomenon might be aware of their presence. Within a few meters, the lack of heat became undeniable. One soldier extended his hand cautiously, half expecting pain. The air was cool, unchanged, completely detached from the brightness only inches away. A soft hum seemed to flicker at the edge of their hearing, not a sound exactly, but a sensation that brushed lightly against the mind. The desert floor felt firmer here, as though the ground had been pressed by something unseen. The lieutenant noted each detail carefully, his voice low but steady as he recorded observations into a small device. Yet even the recorder seemed affected. The audio playback later revealed faint dips in sound, as if the device had struggled to interpret the silence. The flame remained where it stood, offering no threat, no heat, no movement beyond that slight lean. It was an impossibility presented without explanation, a calm puzzle that invited study rather than retreat. The men exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the moment as the beginning of something far beyond their training. In the stillness, the flame seemed to wait, patient and unchanging, as if expecting. The scientific officers arrived before dawn, their vehicles rolling quietly across the cooling sand as if unsure they belonged in a place shaped more by silence than by terrain. They approached the flame with the methodical patience of people trained to explain the unexplainable, yet even they paused longer than expected when they first saw it standing there, bright, sharp-edged, and completely still. One officer lifted a handheld spectrometer, expecting the device to light up with data. Instead, the readings remained flat, the screen showing nothing but a calm blue field, as though the instrument refused to acknowledge the phenomenon. Another officer tried capturing air samples from the space around the flame, but the container registered no change in temperature, no particles, no disturbance whatsoever. The closer they worked, the stranger everything became. The instruments behaved normally when pointed at the sand, the sky, or the equipment cases, but the moment they turned toward the flame, each device flickered or shut down completely. It was as if the anomaly absorbed not only heat but information itself, leaving behind a blank space where data should have been. One of the officers extended a gloved hand cautiously toward the glow, expecting resistance or warmth. His fingers passed straight through, encountering nothing but cool air. The flame brightened at the point of contact, expanding slightly as though responding to the gesture. Its behavior was subtle yet deliberate, like a creature turning its attention toward a curious touch. The soldiers exchanged quiet looks, sensing that they were witnessing something that was not merely physical but aware. The officers attempted several more tests, each one collapsing into the same strange failure. Light meters reported no lumens. Audio devices picked up no crackle or hum. The flame produced illumination yet registered as darkness on half the tools. When one officer circled behind it, he noted that the flame cast no shadow, not even upon itself. It existed without interacting with the world in any recognizable way, a contradiction that unsettled even the calmest minds among them. As they documented the results, the anomaly pulsed softly, almost like a breath. The brightness rose and fell in slow, gentle waves, as if syncing itself to the attention surrounding it. Someone whispered that it felt like being observed, not by eyes but by intention. No one dismissed the idea. The tests had failed, the data was empty, yet the officers left convinced that the flame was not simply an object, it was participating. It waited, quiet, composed, undeniably. Inside the dimly lit briefing room, the air felt heavier than usual, as though the walls themselves were waiting to hear what the officers had brought back from the dunes. A single projector cast a pale square of light onto the far wall, illuminating grainy satellite images taken throughout the week. Each photo showed the same impossible detail, the flame appearing in two different locations at the same recorded second, standing upright in both frames as if distance and position no longer applied to it. The officers seated around the table studied the images quietly, not with fear but with a calm unease that came from knowing they were confronting something that refused to fit into familiar categories. The commander cleared his throat, the sound muted by the thick concrete surrounding them, and began summarizing the findings. His tone stayed steady, professional, almost detached, yet every person in the room sensed the strain beneath it. The flame emitted no heat, no combustion trace, no measurable signature, and yet it existed with undeniable clarity. The absence of explanation felt louder than any threat. One of the analysts leaned forward, tapping the screen gently as if the image might react. He pointed out that the timestamps were verified across separate systems, eliminating the possibility of error. The commander nodded, his eyes reflecting the faint glow of the projector as he emphasized that all reports would remain classified. No soldier was to discuss the incident beyond this room, not even in casual conversation. The secrecy was not born from fear of panic but from the need to preserve accuracy. Rumors could distort the truth before the truth was fully understood. A low murmur filled the space as officers exchanged quiet observations. Someone noted that the flame's shape remained identical across all recordings, as though it were less a physical event and more a constant, an image manifested rather than produced. The projector clicked softly as another slide appeared, showing a thermal scan completely blank except for the faint outline of dune shadows. The flame, though bright in visible light, registered as emptiness. It was a pattern that defied every known principle, and the room absorbed that contradiction without resistance, as if everyone present instinctively understood that disbelief had no place here. The commander finally ended the briefing with a simple statement: they were to observe, document, and wait. There would be no assumptions, no premature theories. The phenomenon demanded patience, and the military, for once, was willing to give it. They dimmed the lights further as the next sequence of data appeared, a slow progression of flickers captured from high-altitude surveillance. Each flicker held a pattern, not random or chaotic, but arranged with a strange consistency, like marks pressed into the night by an unseen hand. The analysts watched in focused silence as the flame brightened, dimmed, and returned to its steady glow, each variation matching another recorded days earlier. It was repetition without error, the kind of precision found in signals rather than natural events. A linguist brought in for consultation leaned forward, narrowing his eyes at the rhythm. He suggested that the flickers resembled markings found in ancient tribal symbols from the region, not in meaning but in structure, a method of communication built from repetition and pause. The room absorbed his words without dismissal, nothing about the phenomenon invited quick rejection. The commander paced slowly behind the table, hands clasped behind his back, studying the images with a calm intensity that kept the room grounded. He asked whether the pattern could be a natural resonance, wind, pressure shifts, or distant seismic activity. The analysts shook their heads. There was no environmental match. The flickers were too deliberate, too consistent, too identical to be coincidence. Another image appeared, this one showing the flame at a moment of heightened brightness, its edges forming a shape that resembled a curved arc. The linguist quietly noted that such arcs appeared in ritual inscriptions carved into stone scattered across the region's oldest settlements. No one claimed a direct connection, yet the parallel hung in the air like a breath waiting to be acknowledged. The commander's expression tightened in thought, and he finally gave the order for a controlled approach mission. The task would be simple: observe the phenomenon up close, record any changes, and avoid unnecessary interference. His voice remained calm, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. They were dealing with something that behaved with intention, and intention required respect. The officers around the table nodded slowly, accepting the assignment without argument. There was no rush, only the quiet understanding that the desert was revealing something piece by piece. As the projector clicked off, the room dimmed into a soft shadow, and for a moment it felt as if the flame's quiet rhythm lingered there, waiting for them to follow it into the dunes. The operation had direction now, not born from fear, but from the steady pull of a mystery that asked to be understood. They prepared and composed. The unit moved out under a moon so thin it felt more like a memory than a source of light. Their footsteps pressed gentle shapes into the sand, each impression softened by the windless night. Ahead of them, the flame glowed like a distant pulse, unwavering and patient, neither shrinking nor growing as they advanced. The desert seemed to hold its breath, allowing them passage without resistance. No radio crackled, no loose gear rattled, even the usual creak of fabric and metal felt muted, as though sound itself had agreed to step aside for what was coming. They walked in a slow, deliberate rhythm, not out of fear but out of respect for the quiet that surrounded them. The flame remained just beyond every ridge, always visible, always waiting, an unchanging beacon that guided without intention. When they reached the top of a long dune, they saw the circle. A perfect ring marked the sand, as though drawn with a single continuous stroke. The sand within the boundary was darker, smoother, almost polished by an unseen hand. One of the soldiers knelt and touched it. It was warm, not hot, not uncomfortable, simply warm in a way that contradicted the cool night air. The warmth didn't radiate outward, it stayed neatly contained inside the circle, as if temperature had learned to obey a rule no one had written. The men exchanged quiet glances. This wasn't a burn mark, nor a campfire trace, nor anything left by machinery. It felt intentional, crafted, maintained. When they stepped closer, crossing the edge of the ring, the world shifted subtly. Not visually, not physically, but acoustically. The faint rustle of the desert vanished as if absorbed. Boot steps made no sound, sinking softly into silence. A soldier tapped the metal buckle on his vest, even that produced nothing, like striking an object inside a dream. The flame hovered at the center of the ring, bright but motionless, its glow forming a gentle halo around itself. It did not flicker, and it did not move, yet the air carried the impression of something aware, a subtle acknowledgement of their presence. Cameras blinked but recorded only pale light when pointed toward the phenomenon. The longer they stood, the more they sensed a quiet rhythm beneath the stillness, not noise but a feeling, the impression of something alive in the emptiness. They felt watched, measured, not with threat but with curiosity. The desert no longer felt empty. It felt engaged, reflecting their presence back at them. The flame pulsed gently as the team stepped deeper into the ring, its glow rising and falling with a rhythm that had no sound yet carried an unmistakable presence. Each pulse sent a faint shimmer across the sand, not strong enough to be light, not soft enough to be wind, just a subtle ripple that made the dunes in the distance tremble as though acknowledging a signal. The men looked around, waiting for vibration under their boots, but the ground remained perfectly still. It was the horizon that moved, not the earth. The closer they came, the stranger the shadows became. A soldier lifted his hand to test the light, only to find that his shadow never formed. It wasn't bent or blurred, it simply wasn't there, erased by a brightness that didn't behave like brightness at all. When another soldier leaned forward, his silhouette vanished before touching the ground, as if the flame absorbed the idea of a shadow rather than the shadow itself. Their cameras responded even worse. Each device clicked on, but the screens filled only with white, a flat, empty glare that ignored depth, shape, and contrast. It wasn't overexposure, it was refusal, as though the flame declined to be seen through anything other than human eyes. The commander spoke softly, advising the team to spread out but maintain whisper-level communication. Voices above a murmur felt out of place here, as though louder sound might startle the phenomenon. One of the soldiers reported hearing a faint tone drifting through the air, something like a flute played several dunes away, but when they checked the audio feed, it held nothing, pure silence recorded over a sound that clearly existed. Another pulse of light followed, brighter this time, washing over the group in a soft wave that made their gear seem strangely weightless for a moment. Nothing harmful, nothing sharp, just a sensation that made them breathe more slowly, more deliberately, as if the flame were setting a pace for their bodies without touching them. The commander walked a few steps closer, and the brightness dimmed, not fading but settling, like a living thing lowering its gaze. The team exchanged glances. Whatever this was, it reacted. Not aggressively, not defensively, but attentively, responding to presence rather than movement. A soldier placed a small reflective marker on the ground, and the flame brightened at the moment the object touched the sand, as though noting the addition with silent curiosity. Its pulses grew slower, more measured, almost guiding the men. The silhouette appeared so subtly that none of the men could say when it first took shape. One moment the flame was a steady column of light, and the next it carried the faint suggestion of form, a gentle bend in its center like a figure tilting its head in quiet thought. The soldiers held their breath without meaning to, not out of fear but from the strange respect that arises when something impossible chooses to reveal itself slowly. The shape did not sharpen or move, it hovered within the brightness as though made from intention rather than matter. Even at a distance, they felt the quiet curiosity in its posture, a presence that watched without judgment. One soldier stepped slightly to the side, and the silhouette seemed to follow the motion, its subtle lean shifting within the flame like a reflection bending on water. There was no hostility, no sign of threat, only an attentive stillness that wrapped around the team like a calm hand. The commander whispered for everyone to remain steady, though no one had considered doing anything else. Every movement felt amplified, not by danger but by significance. The flame brightened for a moment, widening just enough to illuminate the sand beneath it. The ground was untouched, unburned, smooth as if the light had hovered there for centuries without ever leaving heat behind. The soldiers exchanged glances, each silently confirming that the figure they saw was not a trick of light. Its outline remained soft but deliberate, a suggestion drawn with care. A gentle pulse ran through the flame, and the silhouette shifted again, not advancing, not retreating, but acknowledging their presence with a subtle tilt, almost like greeting. The desert around them seemed to deepen into stillness. The men became aware of their own breathing, steady and measured, as though the air encouraged them to remain calm in return. No one lifted a weapon. It would have felt foolish, even disrespectful, to point hostility at something so peaceful. Instead, they simply observed, letting the silence fill the space between them and the figure. A soldier later described the feeling as being recognized, not by a person but by awareness itself. The flame dimmed slightly, the silhouette folding back into brightness until only the pure column of light remained. Nothing disappeared, it simply returned to neutrality, as though the reveal had been intentional and complete. The moment passed gently, leaving behind a quiet certainty among the men that whatever lived inside the flame. The burst of light came without warning, a soft explosion of brightness that washed across the team like a silent wave. It did not blind them, yet for a moment everything turned white, not sharply but gently, as if the desert had been wrapped in a thin veil of glowing mist. Night vision devices blinked out instantly, their screens turning to pale emptiness. Even the thermal scopes collapsed into nothing, displaying blank horizons where figures and heat signatures should have been. The men stood still, letting the brightness settle, sensing instinctively that movement would break whatever fragile moment they had stepped into. When the glow faded, the flame had changed. It was smaller now, narrower, drawn inward like a breath waiting to be released. No wind touched it, no sound surrounded it, yet the air felt charged with intention. The silence deepened into something almost physical, a stillness that pressed lightly around their thoughts. Then came the impression, not a voice, not a message, but a gentle push of meaning without words. It felt like the idea of a request, a soft urging that whispered through their minds with the clarity of emotion rather than language. Leave. Not a command, not a warning, simply a suggestion woven from quiet certainty, as if whatever lived within the light understood that the encounter had already reached its purpose. One soldier felt a warmth in his chest, another sensed a distant ringing like a memory of sound rather than actual audio. The commander inhaled slowly, realizing that every man around him had perceived the same impression. Shared thought without communication, shared meaning without explanation. The flame pulsed once more, dimming further, its edges softening until it resembled a thin thread of fire suspended above untouched sand. No smoke rose, no ember fell. It simply folded inward, collapsing without heat, without shadow, without leaving so much as a spark behind. The technology around them flickered back to life, screens returning with hesitant static before restabilizing. The desert sound returned too, the faint rustle of dry shrubs, the whisper of distant dunes shifting under the weight of night. Everything resumed as if the world had unpaused. The men remained still, absorbing the quiet afterglow of the encounter. They felt neither fear nor relief, only a strange sense of reverence, as though they had witnessed a farewell from something that had chosen not to be known. The sand bore no trace of the phenomenon, even the warm circle had cooled. Yet each soldier carried the same understanding. The report was written in the same neat, measured tone used for routine patrol logs, but the men who had been there knew it recorded far less than what had actually happened. The official summary claimed that the team found no unusual activity in the desert, no environmental anomalies, no threats, nothing that required further investigation. It was a clean document, almost deliberately plain, as if silence could be preserved through formality. Yet the soldiers who sat together afterward felt a different weight in their chests, a quiet echo of something they could not name. They spoke little. It wasn't secrecy, it was reverence, the kind that follows an encounter that is both unsettling and calming at once. Their gear showed signs of something strange as well. Vehicles exposed to the flame felt subtly lighter, as though the metal had shed a layer that couldn't be seen. Tools made from the same alloys handled differently, their balance shifted just enough for trained hands to notice. A mechanic ran his fingers along the hood of a transport truck and frowned, saying it seemed smoother, as if it had been polished by time rather than touch. Instruments taken into the circle recorded blank data for hours afterward, as if their memory had been briefly erased and slowly rewritten. A scientist reviewing the equipment proposed that they had encountered an unfamiliar form of energy, something that interacted without burning, without pressure, without leaving physical trace. He spoke in hesitant phrases, aware that he was explaining something no language had been designed to describe. The desert itself seemed quieter in the days that followed. Patrols reported an unusual calm in the air, a sense of spaciousness around every dune. One soldier said he felt a warmth on the back of his hand each night, faint and passing, like the memory of heat rather than heat itself. Another said he dreamed of soft light bending toward him, not frightening, simply present. These experiences went unrecorded. There was no space in the report for impressions or emotions, no section labeled for lingering sensations. The military required conclusions, not reflections. And so the truth remained between the men who had stood inside the circle, unspoken but shared. They knew the desert had offered them something wordless, and though the report claimed nothing had been found, each soldier carried a quiet certainty that something had watched them gently, and chosen to let them go. It stayed with them in ways they could feel but never explain. Weeks after the mission, when the desert had settled back into its usual quiet, a new set of satellite images arrived at the operations center. They showed the flame again, standing alone in a different stretch of wilderness hundreds of miles from where the team had seen it last. The same height, the same brightness, the same calm refusal to cast a shadow. There were no vehicles nearby, no tracks, no signs of activity, just the solitary column of light waiting in a landscape that looked untouched for decades. Analysts compared the images with earlier recordings and found the same pattern of appearance, sudden, precise, without any transition. It never emerged or faded. It simply existed, fully formed, wherever it chose to be. The discovery stirred a quiet unease among those who recognized it. They understood now that the flame had not vanished, it had moved on, continuing whatever path or purpose it followed long before humans began observing it. Some of the soldiers from the original mission felt changes they could not fully explain. One described a faint warmth on his palm each night, a gentle tingle that came and went like a memory brushing against the skin. Another said he occasionally sensed a presence behind him when alone, not threatening, just aware, as though the desert itself remembered him. None of them recorded these sensations. They belonged to a realm outside instruments and reports, a place where understanding was felt rather than measured. The leadership reviewed the new satellite images in silence. No action was ordered, no follow-up teams deployed. The phenomenon was classified as non-hostile and undetermined, a category that allowed it to be filed away without resolution. But the men who had stood inside the circle knew better. They felt the echo of something unfinished, something patient. The flame had not given them answers, only a glimpse of intention, gentle, observing, distant. And now it had appeared again, far away yet unmistakably the same. As days passed, the soldiers found themselves thinking about the encounter without meaning to, remembering the stillness, the warmth, the quiet suggestion that had touched their minds. The flame no longer felt like an anomaly. It felt like a traveler passing through the world, unconcerned with being understood. Somewhere in the night, it still waited, carrying its silent purpose across the dunes. Its movement was not bound by distance or time, it drifted with intention known only to itself, leaving behind calm questions instead of fear. The desert remembered its passing.